Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Brian.
It's nice to see you again, and it's been difficult communicating from hotel rooms while we've been traveling. But the world has changed quite a lot over the last few weeks in ways that have not been good for pessimists, but nevertheless, I think makes things even more exciting and has made me think that the sorts of things that I like to say about what is happening in globalization now are really substantiated by what's happening, and that is that this really is the crucial phase. Mm-hmm. And it's the crucial phase because things are changing faster and faster, and the fact that things are changing faster and faster means that everything's out of sync. Mm-hmm. And it's the fact that everything's out of sync that really produces the problems. So I was really amazed in Italy that nobody anywhere talked to me about the economic problems. They just talked about food and drink. And I was impressed that whenever I wanted to order wine with meals, the least I could order was half a liter. Uh-huh. And so, I mean, olive oil and wine were flowing as plentifully as ever, and one would never have known that there was any problem at all. And we had thought that there would be no tourists there at that time of the year, which was obviously uninformed. But in fact, the place was full of Indian tourists, Japanese tourists. And I was surprised to see how the public behavior of people seems to vary according to who they're with. So when you're in a group of people where everybody is from somewhere else, a different place, like in a typical international hotel, mm-hmm. Everybody's a traveler, then there is a particular sort of cosmopolitan interaction, and nobody takes anything cultural for granted. But is relatively decent to the people that they have to interact with. But if you then are walking along the street and run into a bunch of tourists from a particular part of the world, they act and interact with each other entirely as they would if they were at home, mm-hmm. and don't pay any attention to people who don't come from their place, mm-hmm. at all, unless they're actually forced to pay attention to something by external conditions. And that, I think, is the sort of thing that's going to happen more and more, that there's going to be different classes of people in the globalized world, some who move around easily in it from place to place, and others who don't move around so much or not easily outside their own social context. But given globalization, their social context is going to keep moving. So there's more and more movement of people, and of course the biggest problem has been the big accumulation of people from particular parts of the world in particular cities in Europe, not so much in America, but to some extent in America as well.
But is that only really then that second class of people, the non-cosmopolitan people? Is that only simply the physical movement of people as they travel within the herd of their own familiar social setting from one country to another? I mean, how much do they intermesh with the background civilization or the background society of it all?
And as far as I could see, they weren't interacting with anything local at all. Mm-hmm. They had tickets bought for them, and they were herded in by their guides, and they were just, it was, their interaction was in fact with each other, just would have been if they were all in a big hall watching a performance or television screen at home. Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
interesting because when you were gone for 2 weeks, and for 50 hours of those 2 weeks, I took a quick trip down to Bermuda, which is only 780 miles off the coast of North Carolina, and it's one of the big reinsurance hubs in the globe today. And I went down with Kunal Patel, who you've met. He's our chief technology officer, and we stayed at a modest hotel about a mile or 2 miles outside of Hamilton, the capital, into which we had to travel every day. And over his protestations, we took the municipal bus because I wanted to ride the bus and see how it was and see how the people were. So every morning we would read the local newspaper in the little breakfast place, got on the same bus at the same time every day, boarded with the same group of people, sat on one occasion next to the same person each way, and we were, I would say, quote unquote, sort of accepted. First of all, because frankly, we were one of maybe six Caucasians on the bus. Certainly, two of the six Caucasians dressed in suits in 95-degree weather, and it was a very welcoming experience. I mean, it was almost as if, well, okay, you're going to ride the bus with us. That's good. And we chatted very amiably with everybody and would ask people as we were going by, what's that? What's that? And other people were joining in from other rows of seats to talk to us. And it was a very uplifting experience. And on the plane ride coming back, I couldn't help but thinking of it in context of physical globalization, of physically being someplace. So when you talk about this group of that second group of travelers who stay within their own social groups and don't break out of it and interact with the background civilization or society, it's very disheartening.
well, I think it has to do with numbers.
Numbers of the herd or numbers of the backdrop.
Whichever, if you're traveling in small numbers, then
Mm-hmm.
you tend to participate much more easily with what's going on around,
That's true.
and you tend to be accepted much more easily.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are traveling in large numbers or settle in large numbers,
Mm-hmm.
then you are not accepted so easily, and you have much less incentive to interact with the local environment. And I think this sort of thing is a process.
Mm-hmm.
And we've said before that 50 years ago, the world was divided up into spatially segregated cultural and linguistic communities, and very relatively few people moved from one to another. And then over the last 50 years, there's been more and more movement. And so some of those communities are now in Paris or outside Paris or in Sheffield or Detroit or somewhere like that, and tending to interact more with each other rather than with the larger society into which they've moved. And this is producing all sorts of cultural and political problems in the host country. And the same sort of thing happens with big herds of tourists that come
Mm-hmm.
from one place and go to another.
But there's also, if I may just briefly interject, there's also a little bit of an equipping, if you will, or a provision that's been made by this electronic advancement in globalization now, to be able to give ones and twos or individuals of virtual tourists the ability to be able to pierce those local groups, those local backgrounds from afar via the internet and other means of communication.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in one respect, it makes things a little bit easier for them to interact and to relate to. And you have many examples of people traveling from previously real foreign places going to other destinations to meet people with whom they've only interacted over Skype and or the internet with. So that's interesting as well.
That's going on as well. And of course, that to some extent is also causing trouble because some people are attracted to go to places and then taken advantage
Of
of.
course, of course.
But in larger societies that are not moving so much, because of the intensification of interaction generally in Western society, but also I think it's beginning to happen in places like China and India, there is a tendency for people to form new identities that give them new associations that give them a sense of identity within this larger society in which they're losing a sense of belonging. So I heard a very interesting presentation yesterday on collective consumption, the way people are beginning in places like America and England to associate with each other because everybody's interested in Harry Potter, a particular sort of music or a particular sport. That is an excuse for them to come together, and that provides their social life when they're not in the office.
Oh.
And these things, of course, are much more fluid because they rise and fall. And what the way I'm developing this argument is to suggest that there is this unevenness in the way things are changing, and the ethnic belonging that holds people together and tends to make them not interested in interacting with the other people who aren't part of their group is the old way that group association, group formation, and social formation used to work. And that, I think, is changing and dissipating faster in some parts of the world than others, and being replaced by new themes around which people form identities. But these new themes around which people form identities are much more fluid and don't last as long, so that it might, like the Harry Potter wizardry interest, which brings a lot of people together. There's something called wizard rock in this country, I learned yesterday, which YouTube will give you a large selection of. That presumably will only last for 10 years or so, and then people will gradually drift away from that and start to come together around some other theme of collective consumption, because it's all has to do with what's being sold. That's innovation in the engineering and service field that inspires people to follow it.
Okay. Let me ask you this question then. All right. So for 2 of the weeks, or for at least 1 of the 2 weeks that you were gone, you were in Italy. All right. Now, any viewer of American financial cable TV news networks during that time period, if you were to take 50 of those average viewers and plop them down in Rome at the Piazza Navona next to you and your family as you're eating lunch, having that endless array of red wine and garlic oil or olive oil, the very first thing on their minds would be, where are these slovenly, lazy, retired Italians who are costing my 401k so much? Was there any awareness there that you saw that the Italians and Spain and the Southern European countries are causing such worldwide consternation insofar as global financial turmoil?
We did see the beginnings of a demonstration, which did seem to be very serious. The police were all ready for it. But apart from that, really no indication of it at all. And there's very little, we were quite surprised actually that there's very little circulation of newspapers in print on the streets. So we didn't read newspapers except on the web. And didn't see much concern among ordinary people that we interacted with in restaurants, and we talked a lot with people in restaurants, and local people, and they seemed to be they were just interested in the tourist trade, which is which means that obviously our experience was probably not typical of anything, because even though the tourist trade is probably extremely important for the Italian economy generally, it doesn't keep everybody going. But the European situation generally, I think, is also part of this larger problem of things being out of sync. that the political way things are organized politically is based on one type of structure, which people complain about all the time because the European structure is not the most representative or democratic structure that you might be able to develop. And the way things work economically are governed by the activities of another class of people, and they're out of sync with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's looking at to the politicians to solve the economic problems. And apart from the political problems between particular countries, the politicians are working according to political models, and the economists are working, or the bankers are working according to financial models, and nobody's bringing them together. And these things have got to come together sooner or later. And I think that, in fact, in the long term, it's the people who run governments who are going to gradually lose more and more of the ability to make things work. And the people who run more fluid systems, like what's being done in finance now, that are going to have to find the solutions.
Well, I found the cover of this week's Economist very interesting. That sinking ship with the cartoon caption, "Mrs. Merkel, would you please throw the switch so we can surface?"
Yeah. So I think we've probably reached the end of our time.
I think so. Well, it's very good to speak to you again when you're only 40 miles away. All right, Brian. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.